It's wonderful to be back here after a year amongst all of you in Raleigh, and many of you I know well, some of you I haven't gotten to know yet, but I'm so happy to be here. And it's wonderful to have the evening prayer with such a full, in Hollywood we have our Ashrama, but there we don't get many people singing. So when I lead the Arati, I don't hear the other people singing. I just hear myself and the harmonium. Now and then one or two voices, but so wonderful, full-throated voices singing these sacred hymns, which are, of course, I think most of you know these hymns. The first two hymns are composed by Swami Vivekananda on his spiritual master, Sri Ramakrishna. And the third hymn is traditional hymn from the Shakti tradition, the scripture called the Devi Mahatmya, 3 Sanskrit verses praising the Divine Mother. And the last hymn we sang is a hymn specifically composed to Sri Sarada Devi by Swami Abhedananda, one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples. So these 4 hymns are very sacred to us in the Ramakrishna order. So that's why we sing them. And now let's take up our topic, which is Darshan, seeing the divine. The idea of Darshan is very appealing to me, and I think to many people, and it's a fundamental principle, a fundamental axiom in Vedanta and in Hinduism. And if we study Hinduism, we start to see this idea of darshan coming again and again, really from the very beginning, in the ancient roots of Vedanta to modern day Hinduism. Darshan is a fundamental part of the tradition and a part of life. What does it mean? Darshan?
Vision.
Just in literal translation, a seeing. Just to see, I see. A little from the Sanskrit root drish, to see. So it means to see, and we talked yesterday about seeing God. And it's more than just seeing. You could say auspicious seeing, blessed seeing. So we don't use the term darshan to say, well, I saw a heap of garbage outside. We don't use it for that. So we're going to get more into that, what we mean by this auspicious seeing. But it expresses or embodies this fundamental tenet of Vedanta, that God can be seen, that God is real and God can be seen. It's not just that we believe in God. No, much more than that. If God exists, then we should be able to see God, and that we can see God. That is not only the fundamental, that's the fundamental aim of our life, and to see God. That not only is it possible, but we must see God. That it is our purpose in life to know God directly and to experience God directly. So this really is what the word darshan indicates, that we are called upon, all of us, to see God, to know, to experience God directly, to know that we are one with God, one with the divine. So let's go back first to the roots of Vedanta, the roots of Hinduism. Unlike most other religions, there is no founder of Hinduism, of Vedanta. We know that there are the prophets of Judaism. There's the great incarnation of Christianity. There are the 10 gurus of Sikhism. There's the prophet of Islam. There are the Tirthankaras of Jainism. There is the Zoroaster of Zoroastrianism. So many founders. We can say the awakened one of Buddhism. Buddha is the founder of Buddhism, we can say. But Vedanta, we don't say that. Where does it come from? Who first proclaimed the truth of Vedanta? We call them rishis. What does it mean? seers, those who saw the truth, who experienced it directly. So this concept of seeing goes back to the very roots of our tradition. And the rishis are called the mantra drashtas, those who see the mantras. They actually see the sacred verses through which their experience is expressed. They experienced their own divinity. They experienced their own true nature as infinite consciousness. And they expressed this truth through these sacred mantras, which have been passed down to us since that time, thousands of years ago, and have been, of course, corroborated by countless saints and sages and seers since that time. So this scriptures, our scriptures are actually the records of the direct experiences, what they saw or experienced in the past. And they in turn guide us how we also may see the divine. So, so often the Upanishads express this experience, this principle of experiencing the divine using the language of sight. We see. Of course, not with our physical eyes. It's a metaphor for experiencing directly. And why do they use this term sight? I think it's because sight is such a compelling experience for us. We experience this world, this external world, our life, everything we experience in 5 different ways, actually. Through seeing, through sound, through touch, through taste, through smell. Through these 5 avenues, we experience everything. And we gain all information in this world through these 5 different channels. Among these 5, I think sight is the most compelling. We take in so much information through the eyes. So it's a very appropriate metaphor for experiencing the divine, to see the divine. And even when we use the word to see also in terms of understanding something, in terms of grasping something. If I'm trying to explain something to you and you're not quite understanding it, and then I explain it a little more, and then you say, oh, now I see. Now I get it, now I see. I understand. To see, actually, even in English we use the term to mean I understand. In the philosophical tradition of Vedanta, there are different philosophical approaches. Different approaches to truth, different understandings. And what are they called? Darshanas. There are different darshanas, different approaches to truth, from Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and Yoga, and Vedanta. They are all called darshanas, different approaches to truth, different ways of seeing, of understanding the truth. The one truth being approached from different sides. So we see how this darshan is really a fundamental concept in going back so far. Now in this tradition of darshan, it has come down to the present day, and in India, of course, is full of temples. This idea that God can be seen manifests in India today and everywhere where Hinduism is practiced in a temple culture in which the divine is enshrined in the temple. And we go to the temple. What do we go for? We go for darshan. We go to see God. This idea that God can be seen, the divine is enshrined in the temple. We go to the temple and we see the image or the symbol of the divine, and we want to see it. So, and more than just seeing, it is this auspicious seeing. It's a blessed seeing. It is a being in the presence of the divine. This is darshan, being in the presence of the divine. And not only that, it's not only that I go to the temple to see God, but also God is seeing me. I go to see my beloved Krishna, and Krishna also should be seeing me. I want Krishna to see me also. Lord, I'm here. I'm coming to the temple to see my beloved Divine Mother. And Mother, you also see me, you also look after me. We have this, so it's a reciprocal relationship. It's a reciprocal act, an act of mutual seeing. I'm seeing God and God is seeing me, and a communion takes place, a communion. I am being transformed in the presence of the divine. And we feel that when we come to a temple and we feel we are being lifted up out of our dull, ordinary self into a divine self. We feel holy and pure in the precincts of the temple. Why? Because we feel something. We feel the divine presence palpably. This is what we mean by darshan. Not merely that we are seeing a picture, say, with our eyes, but that we're feeling something in our hearts. We feel that we are in the presence of the divine. Spiritual seekers also recognize the benefit in spiritual life of visiting saints, visiting great men and women who have realized God, who are enlightened, who have a holiness about them. And so we visit them. And what do we call that? We go to have their darshan. So we also use the term when we visit a saint or a spiritual teacher, a holy person. And so there are some well-known gurus in India today where thousands of people come just to get a glimpse of them. In Christianity also the Pope, the Roman Catholicism, thousands, even millions of people go to catch a glimpse of the Holy Father. They consider it a great blessing just to see him. Why? What's so great about seeing something? It's because it's more than just seeing. We're coming into their presence. They're seeing us. I remember we went once to see the Dalai Lama. Thousands of people have come to see him. And we felt very fortunate. We were standing nearby and we were saluting him, and one of the people in our party started jumping and waving her arms. And so he looked right at us and he saluted us. And we felt, we got his blessings also. Not only were we seeing him, but he saw us directly. We received his blessings. So this is darshan, getting the blessing of a saint. And there's something interesting about the language. When we go to receive we receive darshan. We go to a temple or a saint and we receive their darshan. And conversely, the saint grants his or her darshan. So again, we see this reciprocal interaction, this reciprocal interaction of seeking darshan and granting darshan and receiving darshan. There are so many incidents of this darshan recounted in all the scriptures, really all the scriptures of the world, like one that just occurs to me now, Shabari in the Ramayana. She's waiting for Rama, and she's been told by her guru that Rama will come and she will see Rama, and she spends her whole life waiting for Rama, waiting to see Rama. And every day she gathers fruits and roots from the forest and prepares the offering for Rama, because if he comes that day, she should be able to feed him. And she sweeps the path to clear the path of all the thorns, and in the expectation that she is going to see Rama. And she becomes an old woman, and still Rama has not come. But she doesn't lose faith. She has been told she will see Rama, so she's waiting and waiting. And then one day, the blessed day comes when Rama appears. And of course she is beside herself in ecstasy and joy and worships him and offers him the simple fruits and roots she has plucked from the forest. And then he gives her the teachings also. So this kind of, in Christianity also we find that Jesus, when he went to the mountaintop with a few of his disciples, and he became transformed, he became shining light. Suddenly the disciples saw this light, and a cloud of light came over them, and they fell on the ground, terrified. And so in this also is darshan. The divine does reveal himself, does reveal herself to us. and in fact is constantly there to grant us darshan, but it is we who have to open our hearts to receive the darshan. I think the divine is always ready to grant us darshan. It is we who have to prepare ourselves for that darshan, like Shabari, her whole lifetime preparing herself to see Rama. And then Rama comes. So we've been talking about seeing, and more or less we've been talking about external seeing. We go to see a saint, we have the darshan of a saint or in a temple. The language of the Upanishads talks about seeing not externally, but within. And that requires a shift, because our senses are all pointed outwards. And in the wonderful conversation between the great teacher Yama, god of death, and his disciple Nachiketa, that conversation which is one of our scriptures, the Katha Upanishad, Yama explains to Nachiketa and to all of us that our senses, you see, they're all pointed outwards. He says, Param chikani vyatrinat swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati namtaratman kaschidhira pratyagatmanamayikshat avritta chakshuhu amritattvamichan. He says, see, our senses are all pointing outwards. They're actually defective. They're kind of defective in that they're pointing only outwards, and we receive all information from outside of us, taking in through our senses. Therefore, because they're kind of defective, he uses a language that they're kind of damaged. They're injured by the Creator. The Creator who has made them, has injured them in that they only point outwards. Therefore, no one sees the pratyagatman, that antaratman, that true self of ours which is within. We don't see it, because all our senses, our way of gathering information, of experiencing, is pointed outwards. But, he says, there are a rare, wise people, wise men and women, who are seeking for immortality. What do? The language is very nice, avritta chakshuhu. They cover their eyes, and it's speaking metaphorically, they turn all their senses within. They turn that power of perception away from the external and turn it within. And what happens? Pratyagatmanam aikshat. They see, they perceive directly their own true self, which is divine, the Atman, the Supreme Self within. They see it, they experience it directly. So this is really our Vedantic tradition. We realize that the first place to seek the divine is here, within us. First place. The mystic, the meditator, turns within, strives to see the divine within, awakens to the presence of the divinity within us, and gains, in a flash of illumination, gains enlightenment, realizes, yes, I am divine, I am pure consciousness and bliss. That is my true nature, the divine is right here. Direct experience, not with these eyes, but experiencing directly. This is darshan. I'd like to, we'll come back to this idea of seeing within. But I fairly recently, in November, I had the opportunity to make a pilgrimage to India, and I was struck by this sacred geography of India, that there's so many holy places all over India, and people go to have darshan of great manifestations of God in so many sacred places. I had the chance to visit some of them, and was really struck by the power, the palpable power of the divine in some of these holy places. And we can say that in certain temples, the deities are felt to be specially manifest there, specially awakened is the term, Jagrata. We say a Jagrata Deva, an awakened deity. And when we go, people go from, they feel called to come from hundreds of miles, even thousands of miles away. People come. Nowadays it's easier with airplanes and trains and automobiles, but even since ancient days, people have been going on foot to gain the darshan of Rameshwar, the Rama's Lord, the Lord Shiva in South India. Sri Ramakrishna's father walked all the way from Kamarpur, over 1,000 miles. He walked all the way to have the darshan of Rameshwar, and walked all the way back. And again, he walked all the way to Gaya and other. That was the tradition. We feel called. They're like great magnets. These different temples are drawing pilgrims from distant corners of the earth. And then again, places of natural beauty are also. People go for darshan, to have the darshan of Himalaya. The Himalaya is seen as a manifestation of the divine. We go for darshan. And those of us who have seen the Himalaya, we can verify it's not like, you can't understand it by seeing a picture. You see pictures of the mountains, you think, wow, very nice pictures. You see the Himalaya before you, your breath is taken away. Speech fails, so you can't talk about what you see. You only feel like placing your palms together, because it's beyond it takes our mind to a different level. We go beyond speech. We become speechless, seeing such a manifestation of the divine before us. Or to see the holy rivers, to get darshan of Ma Ganga. And what an experience it is, especially if we go to the source of the Mother Ganga, high in the Himalayas. And there we see this holy river, which is worshipped by millions of Hindus, and which travels through the heartland of India till it reaches the ocean. And where she comes out from this glacier high in the mountain peaks, we feel something. We feel a holiness. We feel a purity. So it's you know, in America we also have our pilgrimages. People go to Graceland to have the darshan of Elvis Presley's birthplace, or where he lived. No, that's the kind of pilgrimages people go on in this country. In Hollywood, we know so many. Our ashrama in Hollywood is just above Hollywood Boulevard, and Hollywood Boulevard has all these stars embedded in the pavement, bronze stars with the names of the different famous movie stars and stars of the stage and the cinema and the music and all of that. And people come to find their special star of their special deity, as it were. But even in America, we also have holy places. Swami Vivekananda spent so many months, several years in America, and several of those places where he stayed for a long time are now places of pilgrimage. Ridgely Manor in New York, Thousand Island Park, also in New York, Vivekananda House in South Pasadena, just near Hollywood. He stayed there for 6 weeks. I met a woman from Bangalore, not a wealthy woman. She had scrimped and saved her whole life to be able to make a pilgrimage to America, to visit the holy places sanctified by Swami Vivekananda. So she came to Hollywood, she spent time at Vivekananda House, she went to Chicago to see the building where Swami Vivekananda delivered his address, Sisters and Brothers of America. She visited all the places she could in her short visit to America to see these places associated with Swami Vivekananda. I met her in India afterwards. She was still full of that spirit of joy, of having had the blessing of a darshan. She had come to America for the darshan of Vivekananda, because really he manifested most of his power here. Most of his teaching power was given here. One of the most visited pilgrim sites in the world. The third most visited pilgrim site in the world is also in America, in Mexico. Mexico being considered part of North America. It is the shrine dedicated to Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe. The Mother Mary revealed herself to a humble peasant several hundred years ago, and her image became burned on his cloak. And now there is a huge temple dedicated to her there, and pilgrims come from thousands of miles. And they come as in India. It's remarkable to see the similarities. They come as in India on foot. They come, some of them, making prostrations all the way to have the darshan of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. So it's interesting how in even in the Catholic Church we have this kind of tradition. But it's also when we talk, when here we are practicing Hindus practicing Hinduism in America, we sometimes face a difficulty that people, they can't understand this. What is this? Statues, no? We in our temples, mostly we have pictures and statues and different representations of the divine. Now in the Western religions, especially Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, there's a very strong aversion to depictions of the divine. And the 10 commandments of Judaism and Christianity, the second commandment is, you shall have no, they call it graven images, no idols of God. So it's considered a sin to make an image of God. So, and yet in Hinduism, how many images of God we have? How many? And for the non-Hindus, it can be quite overwhelming and really make them feel somewhat uncomfortable. You have a God with the head of an elephant. What is this? You have a God who looks like a monkey. What is this? How can you have all these gods? You people are polytheistic, no? You worship. That was the old teaching of the missionaries, that the heathen in his ignorance worships stones. So I think we are called upon as practicing Vedantists, as practicing Hindus, to in the right context, we can explain it. We can explain that actually no, it's not that we're worshipping sticks and stones. Swami Vivekananda, even in India, there are people who have no faith in this image worship. And M is the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is a perfect example. When he first came to Sri Ramakrishna, he was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and he didn't have any faith in image worship. In fact, the Brahmo Samaj was a kind of reform movement which criticized image worship, and taking the hint probably from Christianity and because actually it is a later development in Hinduism. The ancient rishis didn't have temple worship as we have now. They had only the sacrificial fire. So M comes to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna asks him, well, do you believe in God with form or God without form? And he gets confused. How can God have both form and be formless at the same time? But he says, well, I like to think of God as formless. And Sri Ramakrishna says, oh, that's all right, that's good, but never think that your opinion on all is correct. And then M starts to argue with him. He says, but sir, those who worship the clay image, they should be told that God is not the image. God is not the image. You shouldn't worship clay. And then Sri Ramakrishna gives him a good scolding. He says, you fellows, that's the one habit of all you Calcutta people, trying to bring others to the light. You yourself haven't seen anything, and yet you try to enlighten others. Then, of course, he realizes his mistake. And Sri Ramakrishna says, why clay? It's an image of spirit. Image of spirit. So the images which are in temples, they are symbols. It is not that nobody exactly thinks that the image is God. Sort of. Because at the same time, Yes, in a sense, the image has become God. It becomes because we invoke the divine. So we feel that the divine is specially manifesting through that image. Not that God is limited to the image, or that the image is God, and yet the divine is manifesting through these sacred images. And as Swami Vivekananda puts it, a beautiful quote addressing this, why should man build churches in which to worship God? Why not worship Him anywhere? It's a good question. That's what why not worship anywhere? Even if he did not know the reason, man found that the place where people worshipped God became full of good tanmatras. This is a Sanskrit word meaning, we can say, vibrations. We can call it good vibrations. These tanmatras, these good vibrations, it's a subtle form of matter which becomes concentrated in a place where good things are done. Every day people go there, and the more they go, the holier they get, and the holier that place becomes. It's a science of vibrations. In fact, spiritual life, especially in the beginning stages, really can be said to have a lot to do with this science of vibrations. We go to a temple to imbibe, to feel the holy vibrations, to tune our mind to those higher vibrations, which is why for beginners in spiritual life, it is said we need some protections. We are advised to be a little careful about the company we keep. Why should it be so? Doesn't the divine dwell in all beings? That's true. But people who have low vibrations, when we are in their company, our minds start to vibrate at that lower vibration. When we come in the company of a saint, our minds are lifted to the vibration of the saint. The saint can go and mix with the very evil-minded people and lift their minds up. But when we go into the evil-minded people's company, our minds get dragged down. Let's not think that we are so far advanced in spiritual life that we are ready to lift everybody up. Rather, let us recognize and why there are certain cautions about food. It's become a kind of mania in certain circles, and that we have to be careful to avoid. But there is some truth to it. If we eat food cooked by a wicked person, somehow do we want to eat that food? We feel that a certain amount of those vibrations, the science of vibrations, has to do with this visiting this temple culture. It's something about a science of vibrations. I think most of us have visited probably some of the great temples in India, some of the big temples. When I gave this talk in Hollywood, I talked on this subject. I wanted to describe the experience, because many people who haven't been to India, they don't really know what the experience of visiting one of the big pilgrim centers is like. But let's remind ourselves what it is like. Say we're going to visit, for instance, a great temple in South India. They're really remarkable within their size, the sheer size of them. And first, what we find in this temple visit, in this pilgrimage, as it unfolds, it is a series of consecutive stages or degrees of intimacy and closeness. We start, of course, by preparing for our journey, and we have to reach the temple in the first place. It may mean an arduous trek of 1,000 miles, or walking through mountain passes, or even braving the traffic of an overcrowded city. And somehow we have to reach the temple, and there's a certain danger in the journey, and we might even feel that in riding in the taxi cab in Calcutta. We feel a certain danger, and our anticipation and our longing begin to grow. We begin to, yes, I'm going to this holy temple. And then when we first catch a glimpse of the temple, maybe from a great distance. The great temples, especially in South India, they have these very tall gopurams, these huge towers covered with statuary, and we get a thrill. There's the temple. I can see the spires of the temple as we're coming closer. And then we reach the temple and we enter the gates. First, we have to remove our shoes. Mm-hmm. And in some temples in South India, we also have to remove our shirts. At least the men will have to remove their shirts and just go bare-bodied into the temple. As we have to set aside all our ordinary thinking, our worldly thoughts, all the worries and the cares of our daily lives. Let's set those aside, because we are coming to stand in the presence of God. We are coming to see the divine. We are coming for darshan, to have that experience of seeing the divine, experiencing God directly. So we prepare ourselves, and then we enter. And we find that we're in some kind of corridor. There's a huge corridor with great columns, and there are many pilgrims also in this corridor. But we're not yet in the heart of the temple. We're in the outer court, as it were. We've crossed the first boundary, and now we're inside. And we have to walk a long distance through this corridor, surrounded by statuary and carved columns. And then we enter a second gateway. And perhaps we have to step over a big doorway. And now we're coming closer in, and it's dark. It's not so light now. It's getting dark. There's no windows. There's some oil lamps lighting the corridor. And in the meantime, we find that we're amidst a throng of other pilgrims who are also coming for the same purpose, to see the divine. So their enthusiasm is infectious. And some may have come from thousands of miles, and they're beginning to chant the name of God aloud. And that enthusiasm really is infectious, and we start to feel that, yes, we're coming closer. And finally, we may have to enter even yet another gateway as we're approaching what's called the Garbha Mandir, the very womb of the temple, the womb where the innermost heart, where the divine is enshrined, where the deity is enshrined. And as we approach that inner sanctum, the enthusiasm, the anticipation reaches a feverish pitch, we can say, and the eagerness of the pilgrims is in fact, then they begin to push and to jostle. No, come on, hurry up, we want to get there. And finally, one reaches the Holy of Holies, and we stand in front of the Lord Himself, or the Divine Mother herself. And it may be just for a few moments, just for not even a minute oftentimes. If there is a heavy crowd, we may just get a few moments in front of the divine. And yet, in that moment of seeing, that moment of darshan, of seeing the divine, of being seen, a whole lifetime can be changed in that moment. So this temple visit, it's a mirror for our spiritual life. It's a kind of our spiritual life unfolds in a similar way. We have to set aside all our worries and our cares. We have to put aside all other concerns in our life, and we start to get this longing to know God, to see God. And where do we turn? We turn to the temple within. And deep within this human body, which is also a temple, we find beyond the gates of the senses, we have to pass beyond those gates, we have to pass beyond the levels of the mind even, and we enter deep within the heart, and there we come face to face with God. So that is where we encounter the divine deep within. Now, I spent a little bit of time on this temple visits, which we do also here. We have a number of Hindu temples in Raleigh even, and this itself is a temple. And Some may say that, well, that's really for beginners. That visiting temples is for beginners. But for us, we feel that this is our temple, the heart, and we meditate on God here. But it's remarkable to see that, take the case of Swami Brahmananda, who was the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna. He was not merely a saint, he was a saint maker, a fully illumined soul who had the power to create saints, as it were, to bless people that they themselves become saints. And he loved to visit temples, Hindu temples, and he visited a lot of them. And he would go into ecstasy, seeing the manifestation of God there. I think I'd like to read one passage. It's a little bit it's a longer passage, but it's a wonderful passage describing Swami Brahmananda on pilgrimage. It's written by one of his disciples, Swami Vivekananda, who was unique in that he was, his mother was a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. And when he was born, his mother offered her newborn infant to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna said, "Oh, what have you brought me?" And she laid the child at his feet or in his lap, something like that. And he said, "Very good, I accept your offering. Now, you take him back and you look after him, but I'll take him when the time is right." And afterwards, so he would say that he had not seen Sri Ramakrishna, but Sri Ramakrishna had seen him. And afterwards he became a monk. When he was a young man, not yet a monk, he had initiation from Swami Brahmananda, and they went on pilgrimage. They were in Vrindavan, and they were coming back to Belur. And on the way, Maharaj Swami Brahmananda expressed the desire to visit the Divine Mother's temple at the Vindhyachala mountains. And I forget where is that. That's somewhere in UP, I believe.
Middle
Madhya Pradesh, in Madhya Pradesh. Okay, so they went to see Divine Mother's temple at the Vindhyachala mountains. So let me read this account, it's beautiful. The first night, Maharaj, my father, our host, Yogendra Sen, a devotee, and I slept in the same room. It was nearing midnight when I felt a gentle touch. I woke up. I saw Maharaj dressed and covered with a heavy blanket. He said to me, "Get up and dress yourself in warm clothing. I want you to come with me." Without any hesitation, I did as I was told, though it did not occur to me at the time to inquire where we were going. Maharaj took a lantern in one hand and a stick in the other and asked me to follow him. We went outside. It was the night of the new moon and pitch dark. The path was uneven. Realizing that I was stumbling, Maharaj gave me the lantern to carry and held me by the hand. I asked him then, "Where are we going?" He replied, "To see the Divine Mother." When we entered the temple compound, we found the place crowded with worshippers. Some were counting beads. Others were chanting the praises of the Divine Mother. There was an intense spiritual atmosphere. The door of the temple was still closed. The priests were decorating the Mother's image for the special occasion. When the doors opened, the pilgrims stood up and moved forward slowly to have the darshan of Mother. In the meantime, the priests caught sight of Maharaj. Seeing his benign face and impressed by his personality, they stopped the pilgrims from proceeding and let Maharaj enter first. He was still holding my hand and I was following him. When Maharaj stood before the image of the Divine Mother, he exclaimed, "Ah, how beautiful, how beautiful." The next moment he was in ecstasy. There was perfect silence in the temple. The priests and pilgrims watched Maharaj's God-intoxicated state in amazement. After a while, still in an ecstatic mood, Maharaj asked me to sing a song to the Divine Mother. While I was singing, tears of joy fell from the outer corners of his eyes. It was a divine sight to behold. Maharaj asked me to sing another song, after which we prostrated before the mother and came out into the courtyard. Maharaj sat down in one corner to perform japa and asked me to sit also. I asked, "What shall I do?" He hadn't been initiated yet. He asked, "What shall I do?" Maharaj replied, "Think of the presence of Divine Mother. Later I shall instruct you." So this is really an experience of darshan. Now the priests, they were worshipping the mother, and they were seeing the image, the physical image, and they decorated it beautifully, and surely they had felt some feeling of, they had devotion for the mother, and they felt they were in the presence of the mother to a certain extent. But look what happened with Maharaj. When he came in the presence, he went into ecstasy. He could directly perceive that the mother is manifesting here as infinite beauty, as infinite love, and tears of joy falling from his eyes, from the outer corners of his eyes. So the illumined souls, we visit the temples to try to get a little holiness, and the illumined souls visit the temples not only to experience the divine, but also to contribute to the holiness of the temple. And actually it's our responsibility also, when we go for darshan to a temple, not only to take something, not only to receive darshan, but also to contribute to the holiness. So we ought to pray. We ought to pray there, not only for ourselves, but for all. We ought to repeat the holy name and contribute to the holy vibrations there. We ought to make a special effort not to think the worldly thoughts there, not to let our mind go dragged down, and not to leave any negative vibrations at the holy place. So Maharaj would often experience this kind of ecstasy when he would visit temples. And this is really, when he is seeing the mother, on the one hand he's seeing the mother there in the image, and yet because he's going into ecstasy, we understand that he's also experiencing the presence of the divine within, in a kind of mystic vision. And we can ask ourselves, well, how do we experience that? How can we experience God? How can we get this mystic vision? In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna has received the teachings of Sri Krishna. In the first 10 chapters, he has received the teachings, and then he asks Sri Krishna, and now I want to see you. Now I understand about you, I understand my duty, I understand the principles, I have a grasp of them. I want to see, I want to experience it, I want to see you directly. I want to, please show me yourself as you truly are. And so the most moving and thrilling passage, Sri Krishna says, Pashya me partha rupani, behold, see, O Arjuna, behold my many forms. And then a very interesting verse, he says, Natu mam shakyase drashtum anenaiva svachakshusha divyam dadami te chakshuhu pashya me yogam aishwaram. O Arjuna, you cannot see me with these physical eyes. These physical eyes won't be able to see me. So I give you the divya chakshuhu, the divine sight, we can say, the divine eye. Behold my supreme yoga power. And then, of course, Sri Krishna Arjuna was overwhelmed by seeing Sri Krishna in everything, and Sri Krishna as everything, this Vishvarupa Darshanam. He had the darshan of Sri Krishna as the universe itself, as an everything. And that's another story, how that vision unfolds and how he becomes terrified and not quite ready for the enormity of that experience, which is why we prepare ourselves for that experience. If we experience that immediately, we also will be terrified. We have to prepare ourselves to be ready for that. But what is this divya chakshuhu? What is that? And how do we get that. It's in some sense we could say that that's the process of spiritual life, to develop this divya chakshu, this faculty of spiritual intuition, we can call it. And the Upanishad also speaks of this. Na sandrishe tishtate rupamasya na chakshusha pashyati kaschanainam hridistham manasaya enam evam vidura amritaste bhavanti. This is in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The mantra says, the Upanishad says, his form, the divine, cannot be perceived by the senses. No one sees him with the eye. Na chakshusha pashyati kaschanayam. No one sees the divine actually with these physical eyes. Hrida, through the faculty of intuition. Those who know him, realize him through this faculty of intuition as seated in the heart. And they become immortal. Amrita te bhavanti, amritaha. They become immortal. Who experience it, who realize it with this divya chakshu, which is it's called here this faculty of intuition, by the heart, by the mind, hrida manasa. This is often called the dhi, this faculty of intuition, which is what we pray for in the Gayatri mantra. We pray for our dhi to be awakened, our faculty of intuition. Dhiyo yona prachodayat. Awaken our intuition, illumine our hearts. Grant us that faculty by which we can see realize, experience directly your infinite glory. How do we? This faculty lies within all of us. Each and every one of us has this faculty. Only, for most of us, it is not developed. It is not awakened. It can be awakened through the grace of a powerful illumined teacher. It can be awakened through the practice of spiritual disciplines like japa and prayer. We pray. Why do we recite the Gayatri mantra? When we recite the Gayatri mantra with intensity, that is a prayer for awakening this faculty of intuition. When we practice our repeating the holy names of God, we are working to awaken this intuition, to purify our hearts so that we can directly experience God. So the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he asks Sri Ramakrishna this same question. He asks him, early in his discipleship, he asks him, when one sees God, because Sri Ramakrishna is constantly talking about seeing God, encouraging his disciples, telling them, yes, God can be seen. And the historic first meeting when Narendra, the future Vivekananda, comes to Dakshineshwar and meets his master. And what is the first thing he asks him? He asks him, have you seen God? He is looking for a spiritual teacher. And he's asking so many people, have you seen God? And no one can say they have seen God. And he asks him, have you seen God? And he says, yes. Not I have seen God. I see God more clearly than I see you sitting before me. And what is more, I can show him to you. Yes, he talks about seeing God all the time. So M asked him, well, sir, when one sees God, does one see him with these physical eyes? With these eyes? And he replies in the following way. He says, God cannot be seen with these physical eyes. In the course of spiritual discipline, one gets a love body. He calls it the Premir Sharir, a body made of prema. Prema means not the love that we have for ice cream, or the love that we have for, even the love that we have for our children or for our spouses. It's the love we have for God. It's a very intense form of devotion. This body made of prema. This This love body is endowed with love eyes, love ears, and so on. One sees God with those eyes of love. One hears the voice of God with those love ears. Then he says, rather surprising, he says, one even gets a sexual organ made of love. And at these words, M bursts out laughing. As we can imagine, he feels kind of awkward. And Sri Ramakrishna continues unannoyed. He says, within this love body, this communion with the Atman takes place. This communion with the Atman takes place within this body made of love. Premer sharire atmar shohit raman hoy. He puts it in the Bengali. We can say that communion with the Atman takes place within this body of prema. And M becomes serious again. The Sri Ramakrishna then cautions him, this is not possible without intense love of God. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves Him with great intensity. So when we develop these eyes of love, then we see God not only in the temple, then we see God everywhere. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves Him with great intensity. It is like a person with jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I verily am He. It's a very deep passage. One begins to love God. One begins to get this intensity of love. One develops this love to such an extent that one begins to see God everywhere with this eyes of love. And this idea of jaundice, when we get jaundice, the eyes turn yellow due to excess of bilirubin in the blood. And actually, I don't think it actually turns our sight yellow. We don't see, but the eyes are yellow, but that we are seeing things yellow. But it's a nice analogy that say that because our eyes have turned yellow, we also see things as yellow. Like wearing, they say, the rose-colored glasses. Someone who wears rose-colored glasses sees everything rose-colored. We're wearing love-colored glasses, so we see God everywhere. The person with jaundice sees everything as yellow, sees God everywhere. So this is a kind of darshan where we see the divine everywhere. So this really is our goal in spiritual life. It starts with darshan. Starts with darshan in the temple. We go to the temple for darshan. And it culminates in seeing the divine within and without, everywhere. So I think that's probably enough. I've talked for almost an hour. Maybe I read one more quote from Swami Vivekananda, an inspiring quote, and then if you have any comments or questions, we might have just a few minutes for that. Swami Vivekananda says, in this spirit, in this mood of cultivating this kind of intense love, which culminates in seeing God, he says, let the world go. Love and ask nothing. Love and look for nothing further. Love and forget all the isms. Drink the cup of love and be mad. Say, thine, O thine forever, O Lord, and plunge in, forgetting all else. The very idea of God is love. Seeing a cat, loving her kittens, stand and pray, God has become manifest there. Literally believe this. Repeat, I am thine, for we can see God everywhere. Do not seek for Him, just... So this is the way Swami Vivekananda puts it in one of his inspiring passages. Do not seek for Him, just see Him. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on darshan. Have you happy to hear any questions or thoughts anyone has?
Thank you. Beautiful. See, seeing the God is all right, but serving the divine in the heart of man is another thing.
Yes. That also comes when we see the divine, when I see God in your heart, then certainly I want to serve you also, isn't it?
And also, I'll give you one example. I visited Delhi a few years ago.
Yes.
At the Ramakrishna Mission Center in Delhi, in Paharganj.
Yes.
And I was a student there when I was like 12 years of age, with Swami Vivekananda. Now there are some new monks there. And I said, well, I just go and thank them for their work, So I went there, waited. After my turn came, he said, so okay, what can I do for you? I said, I just came to thank you for your work. He was surprised that I was not asking him to give me anything. So you see, even among the monks, you see, sometimes their behavior is not reflecting the love of man, the divine in the man. They think they're coming here because they need something from us.
Well, they're trying to serve.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you see, that they feel that people are just coming because they're too hungry and, because if they're seeing the divine, then they will see the person as being full.
Well, not all monks are illumined souls, we're also striving and struggling to attain that. But we have fixed our goal as that. But you make a very good point that service also is one way that we purify ourselves, and one way if we performed correctly.
That's right.
Because yes, if God dwells within all beings, then as I'm serving people, let me feel I am actually serving God.
That's right.
Let me do it that this is actually my worship of God, to feed a hungry person, or to feed my wife, or to feed my husband, or to feed the hungry man or woman on the street, or to help someone find a home who is homeless. I am actually worshiping God. But it's challenging, no doubt, because there are so many challenges when we try to help people who are in difficulty. We face a lot of problems, and we can get caught in them. So the art is to keep in mind, yes, this too is a manifestation of God. My worship of God here is through service.
Isn't that more the way it all started with Swami Vivekananda? When Ramakrishna was mad with Swami Vivekananda, isn't you just looking for your own salvation? And the people, and that's what the mission started, right? Swami Vivekananda says, I don't believe in the God unless all my countrymen who are not able to eat or have a shelter, I provide clothes for them. And that's the mission started, Swami Vivekananda.
Right.
And the question, maybe you can help me get some clarity. So when I try to understand in my limited way Swami Vivekananda, how all this started, yet when I read all these writings on the Vedanta, especially all these yogas, so my questions, in order to get that kind of insight, burning or helping others, to have that desire, selfless desire to help others, to, like you said, you need to prepare yourself. Is that how Swamiji has so much deep understanding on the Upanishad and Veda, and I think all the monks try to do that too, to get that level of mental understanding on how to help the human being. So Swamiji, probably you can help me, is the reason he has this deep knowledge of the Upanishad, the Veda, Yogas, all the writings he has created, gave him the strength inside to go and help the people in need, and created this mission.
Difficult to understand a deep soul like Vivekananda. He would say when Sri Ramakrishna was on his deathbed, there was an incident in which Sri Ramakrishna transferred his power to Vivekananda and dedicated him to the Divine Mother. So at times Vivekananda would say, it is the mother that makes me run around like this and do all this work. Who knows? But he was not an ordinary person. We come to this world dragged by our karma, dragged by our desires. We have come here to work out our karma. We have come here to become illumined. A soul like Vivekananda, he is already perfected in meditation. He comes only out of unselfishness. He comes out of compassion. The great souls, the world teachers, they come out of compassion to help us see God, to help us realize our divine nature, to help us and how do we realize it? In so many different ways, so many different paths. And of course, in the Ramakrishna mission, he established it with this dual ideal: Atmano mokshartham, Jagat hitaya cha. These two go together. They're intertwined for one's own liberation or God realization, and for the welfare of humanity. And they go together. If we think we can go to a cave and meditate there and realize God, and not, yes, one or two rare saints have done so, but Swami Vivekananda saw that the ideal for this age is, yes, on the one hand, I will go to the cave, but I won't stay there. I will also come and I will serve the divine in all beings.
Right.
And especially, of course, he wanted India to arise because he saw that the deepest spiritual treasures are held by India, and that these treasures, the treasures of the teachings of Vedanta, are to be a gift to the whole world. And if India is locked in poverty and in casteism and all these problems, how will she give her truths to the world? But so he saw that this time the center is India, he said. From India, from the teachings are to come. And look, we see now in America, how interesting. The Vedantic ideas are taking root. Not that everyone is going to become a Hindu, but even most people are still Christian, but how much more liberal they are. Christianity used to be, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to go to hell. Now there are still those who believe that, but very many, I'm quite active in the interfaith meetings and all that, and many very sincere and devout Christians, but who accept Sri Ramakrishna's principle, as many faiths, so many paths. They understand that Hinduism is also a path, that Islam is also a path. So this kind of, and the idea of direct spiritual experience, which is a fundamental tenet of Vedanta, that's also becoming, in America, it's becoming tangible. So many people who are not really interested in religion, but they are interested in spiritual life. They understand that there is a higher dimension to their being, and they want to know that, they want to experience that. So,
yeah, you answered my question. Thank you very much.
But
Yeah, it has to complement. You just go to the cave and get your own salvations. You get the power and then go serve the human beings.
but Swami Vivekananda also went to the cave.
See,
You know,
another thing was that Swami Vivekananda was a great scholar of Sanskrit.
Oh yes.
So you see, if you are not understand the language,
Yeah.
how are you going to translate it? And then he was tremendous in English.
Yeah.
So, and he was at, when he was in the United States here, he was in the company of some very high quality people.
From Harvard, yeah.
So he said, hey man, this guy is someone. See, he's got something unique here.
Yeah.
So he then,
Yeah.
took their advice. It just happened that way, And so his knowledge of Sanskrit and English
Yep.
was combined.
That's why he wrote so much.
That's right, because he was able to really understand the Sanskrit
Right.
and then put it in the language that people could understand. Because
So
Sanskrit is still not, people don't
He
understand.
might be, he's not a traditional saint, but he's a transformer. He transformed.
He's a boss, he's an enlightened soul.
Yeah, exactly.
so
Thank you, sir.
shall we have a closing prayer?
Much.
I think we can just take a moment and have just a moment of silence, and we can chant together, those of you who know it. Asatum, asatum. Asato ma sadgamaya tamso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma mritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From from death, lead us to immortality. Om, peace, peace.